Have you ever started a productivity book with the best of intentions, only to find yourself overwhelmed by yet another complex system that you'll never actually stick to? It happens all the time, which is why I love Tiny Experiments by Anne-Laure Le Cunff so much. In a lot of ways, it's kind of an anti-productivity book from someone who understands that real change happens through small, manageable experiments rather than dramatic life overhauls. In this review, I'll break down some of the key concepts from this book, share some of the experiments that I've implemented myself, and reveal why I believe this is one of the most important productivity books that's ever been written. The book starts with an interesting personal story from Anne-Laure about how she quit what she had previously considered to be her dream job at Google. She left to start another company with a co-founder, but that business eventually failed, which left her in a bit of a crisis moment. She decided to start writing online and made a pact to write 100 articles in 100 days on her personal website at Nest Labs. And the rest, as they say, is history. Now, I've actually followed her website for several years, and I've been a paying member of Anne-Laure's online community for a couple of years, so I was pretty excited to hear that she was going to be writing a book. But I didn't know all the details of her story, and honestly, I can relate to a lot of it. She describes this feeling of messing things up by throwing away a good job, and I've had those same doubts show up in my own creator journey. So right away at the beginning of this video, I find myself relating to Anne-Laure more than most of the authors of the books that I read. Now the rest of the book is broken into 4 parts. Pact, which is about committing to curiosity. Act, which covers practicing mindful productivity. React, which shows you how to deal with uncertainty. And Impact, which speaks to learning and growing with the rest of the world. The very first chapter speaks directly to the problems associated with linear SMART goals. They stimulate fear based on what might happen if we don't achieve them. They encourage toxic productivity focused solely on what we're able to produce. And they tend to be based on competition with others, which leads to a scarcity mindset and isolation, since there can be only one real winner. Now, I've kind of railed against the concept of goal setting for a while because I don't like how binary they are. When you set a SMART goal, which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound, you either achieve it or you don't. And if you don't achieve it, you don't really get credit for the progress that you made. If you do achieve it, you now have this vacuum that you have to fill with another goal. I experienced this firsthand when I was training for my first half marathon. I never liked running previously, but a friend challenged me to do it as a test of mind over matter, so I trained for over a year and actually ended up overtraining and hurting my knee the week before my big race. My patella tendon slipped off my kneecap and onto the side of my leg. But I had trained so long, I decided I wasn't gonna let anything stop me. I was gonna run the race anyway, and I did. But I remember clearly when I crossed that finish line for the first time, there was a brief moment of joy as I had achieved this goal, this thing that I had set out to do, but it was almost immediately followed by dread as I asked myself, now what? The obvious thing to do would be to sign up for another race, but I knew my knee was hurt and I had several weeks of physical therapy ahead of me as a best case scenario, so that wasn't an option. And almost immediately I went from jubilation to depression. So yes, I agree with Anne-Laure, goal setting is broken. But on the other end of the spectrum is the concept of habits. Now I'm a big fan of habits, but there's actually a downside here that isn't exactly obvious. You see, with habits, there's this implicit expectation that once you start forming this habit, you're going to be doing this thing for the rest of your life. And if you think about that for even a little while, it can start to feel overwhelming because it feels like this is a really big commitment. So Anne-Laure's answer to this is something she calls a pact, something that is purposeful, actionable, continuous, and trackable. But it's not the same thing as a habit because it's just something you're going to try for a little while. It's an experiment. She even asked the question at the end of part 1, what's the smallest version of the experiment that you can run? Now, the next part of the book has 3 chapters that speak to the major productivity themes of time management, procrastination, and perfectionism. I like the time chapter in particular as she talks about the difference between the 2 words that the ancient Greeks used for time, where chronos means quantity and kairos refers to quality. Now, the takeaway here is that not all time is created equal, and it's worth shifting from what we do with our time to how we experience each moment. She talks about mindful productivity requiring learning to manage not just your time, but also physical, cognitive, and emotional resources in a way that allows you to show up as your best self when it really matters. She also dispels some common misconceptions about procrastination by framing it not as a moral failure, but as a problem with our ability to listen to what's going on around us. And I also like what she has to say about embracing intentional imperfection and adjusting our ambition dials, as I struggle regularly with my own perfectionism. The next part of the book is really about reflection, and it's easily my favorite. It talks about managing disruptions and making better decisions, but in chapter 7 on creating growth loops, Anne-Laure introduces a brilliantly simple review system called plus minus next. You just create 3 columns and you list out positive observations or plus, negative observations for minus, and what you're going to do next. It works so well because it's fast, it's flexible, and it's future focused, and I highly recommend you give this a try. I've actually modified this a little bit myself and added it to my weekly review process, keeping these lists inside my weekly note in Obsidian. I've also got a shortcut that I created so I can add things to the appropriate list quickly, which I detail in this other video on doing an effortless weekly review in Obsidian. It's not exactly the same as the process Anne-Laure outlines in the book, but it is easily the best version of a weekly review that I have ever had. Another big idea from this section is that growth requires trial and error. Failure is an inherent part of the growth process, which helped me see that disruptions are not merely problems to be solved. They're important opportunities to level up through understanding what happened and how I can run better experiments next time around. She mentions in chapter 9 on dancing with disruption how it's not the feelings themselves that we experience from those failures, but the way we interpret those emotions that really causes suffering. When we step outside of our emotions and we ask, what am I feeling right now, without judging it as good or bad, then we can use it as a data point for conducting better experiments in our next growth loop. The last section of the book is about community, social flow, and learning in public. I love her definition of the pooling effect, which is where a community gives you access to a collective set of knowledge, skills, and assets that far exceeds your own. She also introduces the idea of a curiosity circle, which is a community centered around a genuine connection and peer learning. She mentions that anyone can turn their curiosity into a thriving community, and while my ideal version of an online community I think differs a little bit from what Anne-Laure describes here, I definitely got inspired from this section to make some upgrades to my own online community. The big takeaway from this section for me is that the best form of experimentation comes from engaging with other curious people online. Magic happens when you get a bunch of people who are all trying to learn and grow together in an environment where curiosity is encouraged. And then finally, at the very end, there's a brief conclusion, which is really just a short summary of the main ideas from each of the 12 chapters in the book. It's an effective way to wrap things up, but there's not a whole lot that is noteworthy here. So if you can't tell, I'm a huge fan of this book. As a neuroscientist, Anne-Laure is the perfect person to talk about the problems associated with goal setting. In fact, the subtitle of the book is How to Live Freely in a Goal-Obsessed World. I love that. She does a phenomenal job explaining the value of curiosity and experimentation as a nonlinear path for personal growth, and I find the way that she positions Pacts in relation to both goals and habits to be the missing piece of the puzzle. This book has forever changed the way that I think about productivity, and it's an easy 5 stars for me. I said in the intro that I believe this is one of the most important productivity books ever written, and I wholeheartedly believe that. I really believe this is a life-changing book and it deserves a spot in your personal library. Definitely pick this one up. Now, if you want to go deeper with tiny experiments, I've got an interview that I did with Anne-Laure on the Focus podcast, as well as an episode of Bookworm where we dissected this in greater detail. I've also got a bit of a different way that I take notes on books, which helps me get more out of them. And if you want to learn more about my process, you can check out this video where I walk through the whole thing. The end result of my book notes process is a mind map that looks something like this, and I literally have hundreds of these in my Obsidian vault. If you want to download the mind map version of my notes for tiny experiments, you can do that for free using the link that is in the description below this video. You can also sign up for my newsletter if you want, where I share these mind map files each week along with original articles on personal growth and PKM, as well as a link to something cool that is usually Obsidian related. The newsletter goes out every Monday and you can sign up at practicalpkm.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in another video.